Welcome to Eclectic Soundtrax Podcast. On this episode, we chat with Grammy Award-winning producer and engineer Marc Urselli. Marc has worked with such legendary artists as U2, Elton John, Foo Fighters, Mike Patton, and Les Paul. And he gives us a first-hand look at EastSide Sound Studios in the heart of New York City. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and spread the word. We'd also like to thank our friends at Godin Guitars, Tragan Guitars, Ernie Ball Strings, and 5 Iron Woodworks. Now, on to the interview. Hey, everybody, we're here back, Eclectic Soundtrax, with the mighty Marc Urselli in New York, Manhattan, East Village, right? That's where you're at, EastSide Sound?
Yes, technically Lower East Side because we're 2 blocks below Houston Street.
Okay. Hey, Vic, have you been there? You've been to Manhattan a few times, right? Have you been to the East Village?
Yeah, and I mistakenly pronounced it Houston Street when I was there. And it took a while for people to figure out what I was asking or talking about. And they were like, no, it's Houston. I was like, what? Okay, well, cool.
People make that mistake. And, it's only normal that you would say Houston. Houston, since that's the city. I have no idea why they say Houston. There's probably a history behind it, but I don't know it.
Well, if you've been to Austin, you were here a few years ago. I don't know when the last time you were here. I know you were here. Actually, we're a Tomahawk shirt tonight. You were here for, what was it called? Fun Fest, mixing Tomahawk a few years back.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah.
And then you toured with Brian Wilson, too, I believe.
No, with the Beach Boys.
Or with the Beach Boys, the actual Beach Boys. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. That was crazy, man. That was the first time in my life that I ever mixed a show at a rodeo. So we did the Beach Boys in this rodeo, literally with a stage built on a tractor trailer that would go into the dirt in between, I guess, the animal shows. I had never done that in my career.
So all the Texas cliches lived up to their name there. It's that.
Absolutely.
That's just what we need, right? New York guy comes down here and he's like, oh, well, it really is a bunch of fucking horses and dirt and cowboys and shit.
Until that moment, I thought Austin was different. And then I was like, nah, it's all Texas.
Yeah. It's hard to get away from. But, well, Austin's like that too, though. We've got a street here, what is it? Manchaca, but everybody calls it Mancheck. So I have no idea what the logic behind that is.
Guadalupe and spell Guadalupe.
What is up with your name? Why do you go by Manhattan? Tell me.
I know, right? So there was this band I was in years back, and the drummer is from Staten Island, and I think he was really excited when I auditioned for the band because he thought I was from Manhattan, and then he was thoroughly disappointed when he found out I wasn't. It started as a joke. I used to do open mics with a buddy of mine who we actually just had on the podcast not long ago, and we would just come up with stupid alias names, and one of the ones was Snake Manhattan or something ridiculous. And when I started doing the skunked mohawk, then it just stuck. And there's no really great story behind it. I'm sorry to disappoint. However, I had just been to New York probably for the first time when that name started around 2005. And I love it up there, man. It's a great city. How long have you been living in Manhattan?
I've been living in New York for 22 years. Out of those, about 10 or 12 in Manhattan. And just in September, I moved to Williamsburg, which is right across the bridge from the studio. So now I get to bike to work, which is great.
Oh, okay. Across the bridge.
Yeah, I just bike right across this bridge, and I'm here in 15 minutes. I'm sitting at the desk.
That's a pretty hopping place. I think Williamsburg's and that's also pretty expensive real estate these days, right?
Yeah, prices have gone down during the pandemic, but yeah, Williamsburg is a pricey neighborhood. But I wanted to be more in the middle of live shows. I love my live shows. Before the pandemic, I used to go to 2 or 3 shows every night. Williamsburg has a ton of venues. I'm also near St. Vitus, which is, the premier metal show place venue in New York. So, it's good. I was looking forward to shows, and I hope they'll come back soon.
Yeah, I know. I love that with you. It's always posts about whatever client you're working with, you know, and you're all over the world, you know, you in Abbey Road studios in London and where, you know, France, wherever, as well as obviously they're in the studio. And then, but a lot of other stuff I see is you at bands checking out concerts and stuff like that. And then kite surfing. Do you still do that?
I still do that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Man, the only place I played in New York was in Brooklyn. I think it was Brooklyn, called Lucky 13. Do you know that place?
I do know that place.
Rocker bar. It was a cool little place. I dug it, man.
I haven't been in a while, but I know the place. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully they're still afloat. I don't know. A lot of places here have closed, so it is just kind of been a shit show with live music, and
yeah,
people are trying to get back to it.
Sadly, it's going to be like that for a while.
Now, when you were in Manhattan, for some reason I'm thinking, were you up near Harlem at some point?
Yeah, I lived in Harlem for like 10 years.
Now, up there, I would think there'd be like a lot of history in the jazz world, right? With some great jazz clubs and stuff up there, yeah?
Absolutely. Great jazz clubs, lots of jazz musicians, even non-jazz, really.
Yeah.
You know, Harlem is in the north of Central Park, basically. And the further north you go, the cheaper gets the real estate. So above Harlem, there's Washington Heights and Inwood. And because the real estate is a little bit cheaper than downtown New York, it's full of musicians there, which is great. So, you know, I always love to surround myself with musicians, but Williamsburg definitely has more venues than Harlem. So from that point of view, you know, for live music, it's a better place.
Gotcha. And you're originally from Italy, right? What part of Italy are you from?
I was born in Switzerland and I grew up in Italy, in Puglia, the heel of the boot. So I've lived in both countries, Switzerland and Italy, and I go back to both. And now I live between New York and London. So
so you're over in London quite a bit nowadays. Okay.
Yeah, about 30% of the year, maybe.
You actually have a place over there then?
I do.
Wow. Okay, cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And is that primarily Abbey Road you're working out of there?
I would like to say so, but no, not primarily. I like, there's other studios that I like and use there. I did a beautiful session at Livingston Studio, which is a fantastic studio. And there's a new place that's opening up now, which I'll probably be doing some sessions, which is kind of like a miniature version of Abbey Road Studio 2. So, you know, obviously it's a city with a lot of options. So
awesome, man. We had a guy named Carter Arrington, who's a fucking phenomenal guitar player, great guy, who was in Austin for years and years, and he moved over to England a few years ago. And he's in Is it Brighton? Is that right, Vic?
Yeah,
Brighton.
I think that's what it is. Uh-huh.
How far is that from London?
It's about an hour by train, maybe an hour and a half. It's
Gotcha.
right on the coast. It's a beautiful place, and again, because the real estate is cheaper, it's full of musicians, and it's a very artistic community. I like Brighton a lot. It's cool, but I prefer to be in the center of things.
Yeah, hence New York, right? I mean, and then this is where you've always been, but you've, you travel around. You've worked in LA and all kinds of different studios, imagine, all over the world. So what got you into this line of work? You're a musician originally, right? You had a band, play guitar and stuff like that. But then I remember reading something or seeing a podcast from you it's been several years now, and you were talking about, I don't remember if it was an article or what, but just kind of how you came up and got into recording, right? You started in Italy, had, assembled some gear, I guess, started recording the band you were in and doing local stuff and just sort of learned the trade, right? It was just something that was always fascinating to you.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I don't consider myself a musician anymore. I now in my career, I know what real musicians are. At the time, I was playing an instrument. I studied piano. And I had a band and I wanted to record the rehearsals of my band. And to do so, I bought some equipment and then I bought more equipment. And I basically went down that rabbit hole until it became clear this was going to be my life.
What, do you remember what you started with?
I do. The very first recordings that I did with my band, believe it or not, I bought an old analog, I think it was 12-channel mixing console. And then I took the outputs of that mixing console and I went inside a tape deck, like a regular, cassette tape recorder. And so I was recording the rehearsals onto cassette tapes. My next step from there was I bought an Fostex X26, which is also cassettes, but this is a 4-track, multi-track.
Mm-hmm.
That was my foray into multi-track, and from there it got more serious. And my first machine was an Akai 14-track recorder, which was a track of Synthia, a track of control, and 12 tracks of audio. Forget what it was called. It recorded on these big cassettes that looked like videotapes, but were not videotapes.
ADAT, basically? Was that the...
It wasn't ADAT. It looked similar. And then after that, I went to analog tape. I bought a Fostex I think it was called GS16 or G16S, which was a 16-track recorder on half-inch with Dolby.
Dolby.
Yeah.
Doing my Spinal Tap.
And then after that, I moved to New York, and Pro Tools was happening, early Pro Tools, and my life never was the same again.
I imagine a studio like EastSide Sound, you've got tape and all that kind of stuff. How often is that even used anymore? I mean, I would assume some guys still really, I don't know if anybody lives and dies by it, but some guys might still want to use it. But what's the percentage that you even use that versus the digital and Pro Tools world? 0? Wow. Is it just tapes like non-existent though? It's just so expensive, right? And they don't even manufacture it anymore. Is that part of it?
No, they do manufacture it, but it is expensive, and musicians don't want to spend that kind of money. We do have tape machines, but we keep them in storage, because as soon as you have that conversation with a client and you tell them, look, a hard drive is $100 and you can record hours and hours and hours and hours, and a tape is $300 or whatever they are now, and you can record 15 minutes at full quality. They immediately, they don't want to do that. So if and when we find somebody that does want to spend that kind of money, we can go get the tape machines. They're all in storage. We have 2 24-track machines. We even have a 24-track with a 16-track head. I mean, we got plenty of machines in storage, but nobody wants to use them anymore. So now it's all Pro Tools.
What are your thoughts on now with where things have come? Because lately I hear more and more engineers and musicians that are kind of going, a lot of guys that are diehard analog that are starting to go, man, the digital plugins and stuff are starting to get so good, and I just do a lot of box mixing now and feel really good about it. Like, what are your thoughts on kind of where that stuff is at these days?
I mean, I do a lot of mixing in the box as well. I don't do it because I think it sounds better or the same. I do it because it's a way that allows me to work with artists that aren't able to afford a place like this. If I got to choose, I would work in a place like this all the time. But artists just don't have those budgets anymore. So if I record everything here, but then when it comes to mixing, I mix it from home on my Pro Tools system. And that way I get to work with everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we appreciate that. I remember talking to you and being like, what are you mixing on? You're like, oh yeah, no, I'm not mixing in the studio, dude. I was like, yeah, that was a dumb question. So what do you got there? Tell us about, A room, B room, C room, what are your consoles? What's the rundown of what's going on there?
Yeah, okay. So we have behind me, what you see is a Harrison console. This console is made in Nashville. It's from the late 80s. It's called the Sirius 10B. The amazing thing about this console is that it's completely automatable, but it's fully analog. So there's no AD, DA, there's no conversion. The sound goes in analog and comes out analog. But you can do all the things you can do with a digital console. So you can automate faders, sends, inserts, EQs, everything. It's a fantastic console that served us very, very, very well for many, many, many years. I am in the process of probably getting a Neve console in here. I've always been a fan of Neves. But I love this console. It's so versatile and so powerful. And Nashville, Harrison is a great company. What else? We have Atom Audio speakers. Those are the S5Hs, soffit mounted that you see, the big ones. I love those speakers. They're my favorite ones. I'm an Atom Audio endorser, so I mix on those exclusively, but I do reference back and forth when I want a smaller speaker. I have the Atom Audio A7X, which are wired with a sub 10 that you don't see. It's behind the console. And we also have these Focal SM9, which sound good, and they're from before I was an Atom Audio endorser. So we keep them here so we can give a different flavor to clients that want to hear something on different speakers.
Awesome. And so tracking on this console, do you run in the preamps of that console? Like, how do you like those?
I like those very much. They sound a little bit like API 512s. Very punchy, very clean. They have a big boost at the end of their run. Like you turn up and it's pretty linear, and then towards 7 or 8, like the sound really goes up. I use them a lot, but I also use the other preamps that I can show you if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
So here's our rack of preamps. So these are Vintech X73s. They're basically Neve 1073 reissues. Universal Audio, Art, Altec, Ted Fletcher Pro, Simpro Seed. This is a great, very, very clean preamp from Japan that I endorse. Super clean, expensive preamp, around $7,000 for a 4-channel version, but totally worth it. More preamps here. These are more Harrisons. I don't know if you can see. Let me switch my camera around. These are more Harrisons. So this is the same company that makes the console, and they're preamps from the different versions of consoles that Harrison has made. So there's the Series 12, the Series 10, which is what's inside the console, the 32MR series, and the newest Trion preamp. 512 API. These are Trident B range. We have Ampex 351s. These were designed by Les Paul, who I've worked with. We have 2 of these. The other one is currently being repaired. More preamps here. Tons of more Altecs. We have a lot of these even in storage. We have even more. We have a beautiful Focusrite 4-channel, and we have this. We just got this weight tank, which I haven't got to play around yet. And more. This is some dynamics, more Altec gear. These are compressors, 436C. And 1591A. You've seen some of these 436Cs, and there's some old pictures of the Beatles at Abbey Road using this. BBE Sonic Maximizer, an old Lexicon PCM 60 that barely gets used anymore. And more preamps here above the patch bay. We've got more of those old Ampex. These are the 651s, which are the mobile version of the 351s. These used to be mounted inside a suitcase. So there was a suitcase with a reel-to-reel on one side and these 2 preamps for left and right channel on the other side. And you can take them out of the suitcase and rack mount them. They're the same, you get these wings and they're the same size. And of course there's a patch bay, and that's pretty much it for Studio A. I could show you Studio B, but I don't know if the network is going to hold. But Studio B is a small production suite with an ISO booth.
What kind of consoles in B?
In B, we have an Avid artist mix, so it's a controller situation. We have tons. I'll go there.
Yeah, we'll try it.
What's that?
Yeah, we can try it.
Yeah, if the line drops, I will call you guys back. Also, keep in mind that I'm recording myself with this microphone here, so you're gonna have to use the Zoom audio when I walk into the other room.
Okay.
I'm gonna attempt to do that. Let's see. Okay. Still got me?
Still there.
Okay, so this is Studio B. So it's a production suite, artist mix, lots of keyboards for production, Novation, another Altec compressor like the one I showed you in the other room. More keyboards here for production, post-production, pre-production. Speakers, Atom Audio. Also Atom Audio here above the keyboards. As you can see, we're an Atom Audio studio pretty much. LA2A, which used to be in the A room and floats around between the A room and the B room. And then here, past this door, there's an ISO booth. So you can put an iPad here with lyrics. You got a little headphone controller, and you can basically sing in this room, and it works as an ISO booth for Studio B. Make sense?
Yeah.
You guys still got me? I'm going to go back to Studio A and show you the live room and see if we got some gold records and Grammys here on the wall. Seven Dust debut record, I believe. 2 of my Grammys are on the wall there. An old Billboard article of when EastSide Sound appeared in Billboard. There's another one of those floating around with Mix Magazine awards that I got in 2016 for Nouvelle Records, best recordings of the year. And then here is, let's see if you let me know if you still have me.
Mm-hmm.
You got me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is the live room of Studio A. So what you see is a Steinway piano, 1980s, fully restored. Drum racks, lots of drums to choose from. Lots of amps to choose from. And then what's really special about this studio is that everywhere you see a window or a door, there's an ISO booth. And there's 6 of them. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that's the control room. So you can have up to 7 musicians completely isolated playing in this space with line of sight. They can all see each other and hear each other with headphone mixers. Every room has one of these headphone mixers. So you get to do your own mix of your band, and you get to basically play live, but have the benefit of isolation. And if the line doesn't drop, I'll show you the biggest of the booths, the drum.
Uh-oh. We were playing with fire and we got burned. Oh, wait.
Drum.
There we go.
All right.
And so you could, that with the 2 next, the bass player there, so the drummer can see the bass player. That window looks into the main room with the piano, and then the window on the door looks into the other booth, so you can see the musician that's in there. And these doors are movable. These doors can be open to get the piano in here. So if we're doing a session where we want the drums in the main room, like a rock session, then we move the piano in here, and this becomes the piano booth, and the drums are out in the live room.
Right. Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. How often do you do those kind of recordings? I imagine with guys like John Zorn, you do a lot of that, huh?
A ton. I mean, I record pretty much everything live all the time, but yeah, I mean, I record the piano a lot in the live room, but I also record, if it's a rock band, I move everything and I get the drums out and get bigger drum sounds. If it's a jazz record, then you're not really shooting for the big drum sound. So the drums are perfectly fine in the booth. They sound nice and tight. The booth sounds great. It just it's tools. The booths are just another tool, like a microphone or a preamp, and you use them to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. What the when you mentioned the Grammys, what was it? Was it something with Clapton, or what are your Grammys for?
Well, I won three. Two were for a Les Paul record that had a lot of different collaborations, Eric Clapton being one of them. Sam Cooke, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Keith Richards, Buddy Guy, Sting, Joss Stone. That was in 2005. And then I won a Latin Grammy for my work on a record by Lila Downs, who's a Mexican singer. And I was nominated 4 other times. The last time being this year, actually. Well, 2020, I was nominated for my work on the album by Terry Lynn Carrington, who was a great drummer, jazz drummer. She did an album called Waiting Game with her band called Social... I'm spacing on the name, but it'll come to me. Social Justice. Anyway, great band. It's kind of a mixture of jazz and hip hop. It's got great artists like Esperanza Spalding and I think Aaron Parks, like a lot of great musicians playing together.
And I know obviously every project's different, but is that like you tracked that band and mixed it? Because you do a lot of tracking and mixing. Sometimes you just mix.
Yeah, absolutely. No, the Terry Lynn Carrington, I was not as involved on that as on other records. I just did some tracking here, live tracking with the band. The Les Paul record was tracked in part at Capitol Studios in LA and in part here at EastSide Sound. So I did all the sessions at EastSide Sound, but then I mixed the entire record, even the tracks recorded in California. I mixed them all here. So it changes, you know. The biggest record that I've done as of lately is a record called Angel Headed Hipster, the music of Mark Bolland and T-Rex. It was put out by BMG, came out September 4th. It's a 27-track tribute to T-Rex with people like U2, Elton John, Nick Cave, Devendra Banhart, Joan Jett. There's amazing artists on that as well. It was produced by the late Hal Wilner, who sadly passed away of COVID in last April. And that also I mixed entirely here, but it was recorded all over the place. A lot of it in LA, some of it in New York, some in New Orleans, France, etc., etc.
That's interesting when you're dealing with something like that. I wonder, like, seems like more song by song is almost its own mix, as opposed to obviously if you're tracking a band through the whole album and you're kind of getting a baseline for a lot of the stuff and working off that, right? So I would think those collaborative projects with all these different musicians in different studios, it's almost like, you know, more complicated and time consuming mixing something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely harder to mix a record like that because there are so many moving parts and so many variables, and every song is its own animal. So it was recorded across 10 different studios. Every song has a different rhythm section, or almost every song. Every song has a different lead vocalist. So it's like you just have to treat every song as if it were its own record.
Mm-hmm. When you're mixing, do you have like some guys will say, you know, they just put up all the faders and then kind of work off that. Some guys start from the ground up and kind of building instruments. Do you have a philosophy on that, or is it vary? I mean, I imagine many things vary per project, but do you have some sort of basic fundamental approaches when starting a mix?
It depends on the genre, really. If it's a rock band, I start from the drums and then I add the bass and I get my low end tight and solid, and the relationship between the kick and the bass is very important. And then I start adding guitars, keys, and whatever else comes, and I do the vocal last. But if it's a singer-songwriter album, for example, then I start from the vocal because that's the most exposed thing, and then I build the mix around the vocal. If it's an orchestral mix, obviously there's other considerations. So it really depends on the genre of music, and I'm very versatile and all over the place, and I mix a lot of different genres. So I have different styles depending on what.
Well, and also your approach to tracking and everything, right? Coming from it from an artistic standpoint, not just. And I think that's way a lot of audio engineers are, right? And that's the artistic part of it, and the musicianship part, where you're as an artist. Making choices of microphones and how you want to do this and that. It's not one size fits all for sure, right? Not even within the same genre, right? So
absolutely, yeah. I have different preferences for different genres, but even different instruments. If like for example, there's kick drum mics that I'll use if it's a rock session, and different kick drum mics that I'll use if it's a jazz session, for example. So yes, I do change. Take the right tool out of my toolbox based on whatever it is that I'm working on. And that all comes from experience, from trying different microphones and different preamps and different combinations of mics and preamps in a certain space of the studio versus another corner. I'm very comfortable here because I've had years and years and years to try all of those permutations, to try the drums here and then try the drums there and then try the drums in the drum booth and see what works best. So for me here now, it's second nature. I can work very quickly. I can get a sound very quickly. And I like to record the stuff that I'm going to mix. A lot of stuff that I get for mixing arrives in sometimes not so good states, to be kind. But if I record it, then I can make sure that it all sounds great. And I know, I'm basically already making decisions to an extent that will make my mixing process much faster and easier.
And when you're tracking the stuff and it's done, correctly with the big picture in mind, I would assume then, you're basically setting yourself up to where you're not having to really go through and do a lot of filtering and EQing and are very minimal, as opposed to if you're getting tracks from someone else, you're going to have to go through and or a lot of times you're going to have to go through and clean stuff up, right? And create space and get rid of crappy frequencies and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's what I'm referring to when I say that if I track it, then I can make sure I track it correctly. And I track it with a certain vision in mind, with a certain sound in mind. So I can then get much, much faster to the end result when mixing it.
Like as a general sort of, and this is a super general statement, but like in a jazzy, roomy context, right? You're kind of going in like, I want a roomy sound, right? And maybe something with a modern rock metal, you would be like, I really want definition between each drum and stuff like that. So you're like making all these choices on the front end. I'd be really curious to know, and again, there was some interview or something. It's been so long now since I'd read it, and you had gone through a rundown of like a whole drum setup and all kinds of cool shit you were doing. Could you give us like a kind of a rundown of something that might be a typical, hard hitting rock band of what you would do drum wise?
In terms of microphones, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Recently on the kick drum, I've been using the a Lewitt audio. Lewitt is an Austrian brand spelled Lewitt. I can show it to you. Hold on. I have it right here. This is the DTP 640 REX, this microphone. And what's special about this microphone is that you can see in this picture, it's got two different capsules. So it's got a large diaphragm dynamic capsule and a small diaphragm condenser. And so what that means is that you're recording without any phase issues, two of the exact same signals with two very opposite sounding microphones. And because I often end up recording a kick drum with a large diaphragm and a small diaphragm, and you have the dynamic to get like the oomph, and you have the small condenser to get the attack, this microphone solves all of those issues. So ever since I've tried this, which has been a recent acquisition, I've been using only this one for a kick drum. But before I had this, I used to use, for example, the Sennheiser 602 on kick drum, which has a beautiful punch, sounds great on kick drum. I used to use a FET 47 at times. Sometimes I used a D112 or a Beta 52. In some cases, I was using an RE20, which, by the way, is a great microphone if you're recording jazz, because it's very smooth on the top end, very rolled off, so that you don't need all the attack that you need in rock or metal or funk when you're recording jazz. So it also depends on whether the drummer has both skins or just one skin on the bass drum, etc. Snare drum, I stick with my good old SM57, sometimes a Beta 57 if I want less hi-hat in my snare sound, if the hi-hat is very loud. Or
I'm curious about you when you say that, like, so what's the difference between those two mics? It's just a tighter focus, or what?
It's cardioid versus hypercardioid,
Okay.
So if hypercardioid obviously is more like that, and the cardioid is more like that. So if you have your hi-hat here and your snare here, and you're getting too much hi-hat because the drummer is playing with the hi-hat open all the time, or it's just a very hi-hat, very loud hi-hat, things like that. For the hi-hat itself, I use a Microtech FL M940, which is a rather expensive large diaphragm condenser. It's about $1,800, but I've tried many microphones, and that's my favorite ones. Another microphone that costs less and I've used on hi-hat and sounds great is the Bayer Dynamic M160, which is a small ribbon microphone. On toms, I always use MD421s, Sennheiser MD421s. And on overheads, I've gone back and forth between different solutions. Recently, I've acquired a pair of Coles 4038 ribbon microphones. I've been loving those. But before that, I used to use AKG 414s, large diaphragm condensers. There's also a company called Erlund Microphones, EHRLUND, from Sweden. And I love their microphones. They have a triangular diaphragm, so they're really great for fast transients. But they can't take the amount of SPL that a loud drummer would put out. So if I'm doing a jazz session, then I can put those either the EHRM model, which I have 4 of, and I can just use 2 as stereo, or there's a stereo version of that same capsule called EHRT, and I put one of those in the middle on top of the drum set. And if it's a jazz drummer with brushes or who doesn't hit too hard, it's a gorgeous sounding microphone. So pristine and clear. So yeah, those are some of my drum mics. And then I also do room mics, especially when I move the drums outside into the room, into the live room. I use a gorgeous microphone. I'll show you that because that's a beast. Hold on one second. So this beast right here is a microphone made in Poland called the Hum Audio Devices. You can see the logo right there. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible name, I know. A terrible name for something in a studio, but the company is fantastic.
Lots of ground noise.
They make this amazing,
holy shit,
ribbon microphone, very heavy.
Wow.
So this is a stereo ribbon microphone that can work both in LR, left and right, or in mid-side, MS. You can just switch the capsule, as you can see. Now, the cool thing about this microphone, besides the fact that it's a stereo ribbon microphone, which in itself is a rare and amazing thing, and the microphone sounds amazing, is that it comes with internal preamps built into the mic. And so because there's internal preamps, you need a little controller. So it's got this little box inside. With this little box, you can control your gains, of course, of the internal preamps, but you can also add a low cut filter, phase inversion. You can add an air boost, because as you know, ribbon mics are usually darker, so the air boost brings some of that high end back. And there's the MS decode button. It works on a regular XLR, so what you do is you connect the live room. I mean, you connect the microphone in the live room, and then you run the control. You run 3 cables. You run the control cable to the control room into this box, and you can then control everything from this box in the control room. But you can go directly into Pro Tools. You don't need a preamp anymore because it's got built-in preamps.
Oh, okay.
Fantastic microphone. Wow.
That's I don't know if I've seen that before, a mic with its own preamp.
It's a very rare design. This is a, this company is just fantastic. It's one of my favorite companies in Poland. They are also making a console, and they make a preamp, which I'm about to get to test, and they make a mono version of the ribbon microphone. So fantastic company. Hum, HUM.
When we're talking about actual hum in a studio, what's that frequency? What's that annoying frequency?
That depends if you're in the US or in Europe.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, what is it in both?
Well, it's either fixed 50 or 60 hertz, assuming it's ground hum.
Okay.
It's not a problem I have to deal in a place like this.
Right, you got all the clean power.
Clean power, everything is shielded. We never have any hum. The only time there's hum is when those people arrive, those people that have things with 6 strings and big amplifiers.
Oh, those guys are the worst. I hate those guys. Yeah,
those people always bring the hum with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, do you do a lot of reamping? Do you ever have guys just send you DI stuff and then reamp it, or?
I don't do a lot of reamping. I do have what I need to do reamping, but if somebody is just sending me DIs, unless they specifically ask me for reamping, then I usually use a plugin. And there's so many great plugins these days. In the world of guitars and bass, I like the IK Multimedia Amplitude plugin, which has a bass version and a guitar version. So many sounds in there. I feel like you don't really need to reamp. But my preference is recording a real amp with real microphones.
What do you have any go-tos? I mean, on a guitar amp and a bass cab, or is there some relatively standard stuff you do in that route too?
Yeah, it's pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary. But I always encourage guitar players to bring their own, because a guitar amp. You're a guitar player, so you know how attached guitar players can get to their sound.
I mean more mic wise when you're miking it.
Oh, mic wise SM57, great mic, probably the best mic ever made. Or sometimes I use a Sennheiser 509 as a second microphone, or I use a Royer R121 as a second microphone. So usually the 57 is the main mic or the close mic, and then the second mic is either a ribbon or a condenser.
And you're giving one, you just slam in the 57 right on it, and you give the other one some distance, or?
I've done both. I've had both microphones right on the side of the cone, so that they're perfectly in phase, picking up the same signal, and then you really hear the different qualities of the two mics. And sometimes I've had a close and a far. That way I can have a little bit more room, and you just have to make sure that you're in phase with the two microphones.
As someone without all the true analog outboard gear and getting into the world of plugins, what are some recommendations you have or what are some favorite plugins that you use? Compressors, EQs, primarily, I guess. Like, what are some of your favorites and stuff in the box?
In the box, okay, for dynamic section, I love Mac DSP plugins. I've been an endorser of Mac DSP for many, many years, and they're my favorite when it comes to a regular compressor or an EQ. That's kind of my channel strip of choice. Huh. But I do use for dynamic EQing, which is something I do very much of in my mixes. I use Melda Production, which is a European plugin maker, and they have a a dynamic EQ plugin that I really like. And what else did you ask me besides dynamics and EQ?
Well, I guess one thing I should ask is just what is a typical chain? I mean, are you pretty much always gonna end up with some sort of EQ on something or some sort of compression? Like, what are the vital plugins that you kind of find across the board when mixing?
Well, I mean, you need a channel strip. That's kind of a vital plugin because it's replacing what you would be doing on a console.
Right.
But assuming you've recorded everything well, and assuming the material is not too dynamic in nature, you could get away with just an EQ and without a compressor. But then again, backtracking even more, assuming you know exactly what you're going for, and you can make certain choices when recording in terms of mics, in terms of mic placement, which is just as important as mic, you could actually do a whole recording without using any EQs at all or any compressors. But you have to really know what you're doing, and you have to commit to a certain amount of choices. But you can, with a microphone, with proximity, with angle, you can change the sound of the same source that you're picking up so much. And people don't realize this. People just slam a mic on and look for the signal. But angle and proximity are a tool like an EQ. They are in effect you are changing the equalization of what you're recording. So those are the choices that I was referring to in a more nebulous way before, when I said you make certain choices ahead so you make your life easier when you mix.
Well, and once upon a time, those choices was it, right? I mean, and you could only do so much in post. You didn't have 1,000 things in a computer that you could fuck with later. So I think it's still relevant, always will be relevant, but especially anyone coming from more of an old school engineering background, of course, understands that, And I find myself as someone, like, I equate me, if I get up tracks and try to mix, I feel like what I am right now in that world is what maybe I used to be as a guitar player, where you just want to, look, I've got all these, I just delay and reverb and sweep pick because I can, you know what I mean? Like everything. And so I feel like I probably make the amateur mistake of like putting too much shit on, you know what I mean? And like fucking with EQ too much instead of letting something just, I think the biggest thing would be like, is it, if you're cutting frequent, like what is the areas that are like the trouble areas? If you're dealing with, well, when you mentioned kick and bass, right? Like sitting those together, like what is some advice in something like that and making those work together? Like what do you, and I know it's going to be different. It's not an exact number, but where do you kind of typically go for the kick drum? Where do you go for the bass? Like that, what is a range you might filter out, or is this just too broad?
It's too broad because every kick drum sounds different and every bass sounds different, and a bass could have, a lot of distortion on it. So you want more of top ends that you might not need in a different situation. Because if it's an upright bass or an electric bass, depends whether it's going through a DI or whether you're picking up a microphone. I mean, I can throw numbers at you, but they're so specific. I will say this. Low end is affected way more than high end by phase correlation. So it is important that you get your phase in place. If you're recording the kick drum with multiple microphones, you want to make sure your signals, your kick drum signals are perfectly in phase, or you're just going to lose low end instead of getting low end, So that's the most important thing. And then, it depends on the signal you're recording. If your signal doesn't have a lot of low end, you can boost a little bit. But usually, like I said, if you record it right, you don't have to boost. Usually, I end up cutting rather than boosting,
Okay. Yeah, phase, man. Where did you, is this trial and error? Where was your schooling in that, or how did you develop your ear, particularly in something like phase? Because I don't feel like that's something that everyone's just gonna like hear, right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't hear it because a lot of people don't have the knowledge about, don't know about it, or don't have experience with it, or have never bothered about it. And I was, I learned phase later in my career. When I started, it was never really, it was not a concept that was very clear to me. So I just educated myself. I read, and nowadays we don't even have to read anymore. You can just turn on to YouTube, and there's going to be 1,000 people explaining the same concept. We're in the YouTube generation, today's generation, has so much knowledge at their fingertips that there's really no excuse for not knowing or not understanding something.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone needs to know everything. I'm saying if you're an engineer and that's your craft, you have no excuse not to learn about phase, because there's plenty of resources for you to understand it.
But you came up pre YouTube, right? I mean, you weren't. So you were reading books and getting knowledge in that. But it wasn't like some kind of course study or university or anything. Did you ever attend any kind of schooling for engineering?
I did consider going to SAE, School of Audio Engineering. Mm-hmm. And in the end, at the time, I just couldn't afford it as a young person, as like 18-year-old me. I didn't have the money for the tuition. That's when I decided, let me go to New York and go have an internship. And that's what I did. And I came here to this studio, in fact, to EastSide Sound, for an internship. And I cleaned toilets and poured coffee and broomed the hallways for almost 2 years without any pay, living off of my savings, in order to find the right time to prove myself. And that time eventually came, and I worked my way up, and I went from runner to assistant to engineer to chief engineer. And now 20 years later, already for the last more than 10 years, I've been managing the studio and being the chief engineer here.
That's awesome, man. That's such a cool, legit story of like how you hear. I feel like, the glory days of like, that's what you did, right? You went into a studio and you kind of cut your teeth and you learned. And so for you, were you, kind of hanging in the shadows and just getting tidbits of information, being able to kind of watch sessions, or were you able to kind of sit in and observe stuff, or were you able to like go in to after hours, so to speak, and practice stuff when you were interning, or how did that work?
Yeah, it all came with time. At the beginning, I'd have to ask whether I could sit in, and they would say yes or no, depending on what they were doing or what other clients were there. As long as I was doing my duties, I could sit in. But then I was also always on call. So if a client wanted coffee, I wasn't continuing to sit in. I would stand up and go fetch coffee, So it kind of depends. It kind of just evolved, and it went from being able to sit in to then being asked to set up a microphone, to break down, to, it was a lot of stuff. And as I always tell my interns here, is you have to prove your worth, and the best way to prove your worth is to become indispensable to the studio. When you become indispensable, that's when you start getting hired. Mm-hmm. And just today was I won't mention name, I don't want to embarrass the poor kid, but I had an intern. We've had an intern for 2 or 3 months, and I asked him to set up a session for a client in Studio B, and he couldn't figure out some of the routing. And I told him this was your chance to prove that you've been here for 3 months. You really have no excuse for not understanding the routing of the studio. It's not like I'm asking you a weekend. Mm-hmm. So, today's generations just don't get it. They don't understand. They think that interning in a studio is their chance to work on their beats in the off time. And they don't understand that if they learn signal path, which is the most basic of knowledge you have to acquire in a studio, you can actually become useful. And when you become useful, you get paid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it all starts the musician, right? It starts with whatever their instrument is and how well they are, their proficiency, their instrument. And then there's the chain all the way to the end, right? And ideally everything in that chain is pristine. Now I guess some people might say, I don't know, everything in the chain is important, right? The microphone or the instrument, the cable. Like, are you, is the cable super important? What kind of cabling do you have? Mogami or?
It's funny you said that, because check this out. I'm recording. This is the microphone, the cable that's plugged into the microphone I'm using just to record the voice for the podcast. But these cables are the only cables that we use here at EastSide Sound. They're by a Boston company called Nordost Cables. And these cables are insulated with oxygen. So you actually have individual conductors in here that have oxygen between them, because oxygen is the best insulation that you can have between electrical signals, much better than whatever rubber or whatever else they're using. They're expensive, but I've had so many people, when somebody comes in and I put the XLR cable on a microphone, they're like, wow, it sounds amazing. But they're in a professional recording studio, so they don't know if it's the cable or the microphone or the preamp. And the truth is, it's a combination of all of those things.
Yeah.
But I have XLR cables and instrument cables by Nordost.
Okay.
And when you have a guitar player that comes in, this happened just a few weeks ago. I had a guitar player, he came in, he plugged in his guitar, his cable was crackling, the typical problem that all guitar players face eventually with any kind of cable. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh man, I won't mention the name of the cable company, but I just bought this cable and it cost me like $40. I was told it was a good XLR. I was like, don't worry, a good quarter inch. I said, don't worry, I'll give you one. And I went and picked one of these Nordost cables and he plugged it in, and his face just went blank. He's like, I don't recognize my sound anymore. Everything, it's so much more than my sound. It's so much more open and more clear. And when I first started working with Nordost as an endorser, they sent me some cables to try, and I didn't believe that a cable could make so much of a difference. In fact, if you watch after this interview, you can go on YouTube and Google or YouTube Marc Urselli Nordost cables, and you'll find a test where we used two exact same microphones with two exact same preamps, with a regular XLR cable and a Nordost XLR cable, recording the same source. And even on YouTube, with the compression from YouTube, you can hear the difference.
Wow.
So imagine in a professional studio setting.
Is that a relatively new company? How long have they been around?
You catch me unprepared on the history, so I don't know how long they've been around, but I do know that they're starting to do more in the pro audio world, and for many years they were in the audiophile market. So they were making $1,000 cables for those people that have $10,000 turntables and things like that,
What else was I just gonna say in line with that? Oh, cable distances, right? And that's another factor you find. Do you have or if the cable's great, it doesn't matter?
Yeah, I mean, in the studio, it's not that much. It's not a huge studio. You saw the place. I mean, it's large enough, but it's not like we have to go football fields of cables. So that's never really an issue here.
Oh, what occurred to me, you running Live Sound. So I know you've been out on the road with Tomahawk. Do you know anything about, COVID's kind of jacked everything up. I don't know if they're going to be able to tour or if there are plans of that because of the new Tomahawk record. Have you heard anything on that front?
I've heard the single, but I haven't heard anything else. No. I mean, I don't think anyone knows anything about live touring. So
Right. But like when you go out on the road with those guys, and I mean, you're taking some of your own gear, right? And your own stuff, or are you working off of whatever the venues have?
I usually work with what the venue has, but I also, depending on the size of tour, well, I should say it depends on the size of tour. Tomahawk tour, it's smaller band, smaller venues, 2,000 cap more or less. So we go and we use what's in the venue. Mm-hmm. When I do a bigger tour, like for example, Beach Boys, I get to be a little bit more specific about what I want. So I request a certain type of console or a certain type of mic, and the local promoter has to agree to provide that. And there's a production manager in the middle that makes sure that that happens. Bigger tours, like when I was with Lou Reed, we would tour with a truck, and we had our own consoles and microphones, and everything was ours basically. So it depends on the size of the tour.
You did a lot of, I mean, so I know you've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people, but tons of work with John Zorn, who puts out a record like every 15 minutes, and you've done probably, I don't know how many John Zorn records, right? But then
more than 100.
Huh?
More than 100.
Jesus Christ. That's insane, man. Wow. That's just so crazy.
The last time I counted, there were about 107. And then we did some more, and now it's probably 110 or 15. I forget.
Good Lord. That you've worked with him on.
That I've done. He's had, you know, I mean, he's 65 maybe, and I've only been working with him for 12 or 13 years. So before that, he's got another 40 years of career that he's been putting out records. So
does he chart out a lot of stuff, or is it a lot of is it all written out?
Everything is written out. I mean, not an improvisation, but all the lines are written out. Yeah.
Wow. And so with Lou Reed, though, I know you guys were close, but did you do a lot of recording with him over the years? Was this like his go-to studio, or?
I mean, the truth of the matter is that in the last 7 years, he hasn't done a lot of recording himself. He did the record with Metallica, which sadly I wasn't involved with because they did it with the Metallica engineers and people. But other than that, he hasn't really released any records in the last, 5 or 6 years of his life. We did do some stuff here. We did a recording for a Starbucks compilation of a Buddy Holly cover. We recorded it at Avatar, and we mixed it here at EastSide Sound. Then I did some recording with him for other people where he was a guest. I did a folk song that he was a guest on that I mixed here. There was also a live DVD that never came out of a concert that I mixed and recorded live, and then we mixed it here together with Lou in the studio. We worked on it for 4 or 5 days. We were very happy with it. Sadly, never saw the light of day, but that might change.
Okay, yeah, because it's something that was completed. It just has to do with record labels,
legal rights, and all that stuff. Yeah.
I would imagine someone like him, a lot of artists would be. Speaking of guitars and stuff, right? I'm sure very specifically had what he wanted in mind in a particular rig. Or do you find a lot of guys, high profile guys? Are they open a lot of times, or a lot of times are they, oh, this is what I do, make it work, kind of thing?
In the studio, you mean?
Yeah.
Lou was, he was trusty in me. He trusted me with my choices. There were certain things he was specific about, like, he wanted a certain microphone on his guitar, or he wanted a certain vocal mic when we were live. But other than that, he trusted me. It's not like he's going to tell me how to mic up a drum set or things like that.
Right. The pretty simplistic setup on his end?
No, I would not say that.
Really?
Yeah, Lou was... Hold on, I just want to make sure I didn't accidentally stop the recording for your podcast. Lou was had a very big setup, depending on what tour we did. When we did the Metal Machine tour, if you Google some pictures of Lou doing the Metal Machine tour, he had like 3 pedal boards the size of a table, 1, 2, and 3, and they were elevated instead of being on the floor. And he would sit down and play guitar, and then he had a ribbon controller. So Stuart Herwood, who's been his guitar tech for 15 years, knew everything about Lou's setup. Wow. We always had multiple amps going, whether they were being used at the same time or were spares, that's another matter. But there was a lot to set up for Lou, and so that's where Stuart came in and did all of that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I would think. Yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of textural stuff, I guess. And you wouldn't want to name names, but have you? How much have you been on the road opposed to in the studio? I mean, you're more a studio guy, right? But because they're two different things, right? I mean, running live sound and being and running and working a studio are two completely different things. And a lot of people would probably say, if you can do live sound, right? Like, because you've got to in the moment be able to make decisions, make things happen, deal with issues, right? So that's great training. But how much have you done comparatively, would you say?
I love doing both. I do agree that they're very different, but I've always loved doing both, and I love staying versatile, staying sharp, and I love not doing the same thing all the time, because variety is the spice of life. So how much I've been on tour versus studio kind of depends on the year. When Lou was alive, we would do more touring. The most touring I've ever done was with the Beach Boys. They had, I worked with them for 6 months, and we were out, on average 4 days a week at least. So in those periods I would do less studio work, but it usually balances out. And now I'm doing more studio work than live work, especially during the pandemic, clearly during the pandemic, but even a little bit. Before the pandemic hit, I had April and May, complete March and April and half of May were completely booked up with live shows. So I would have been at different bands, but I would have been away for 2.5 months if the pandemic hadn't hit. So as you can see, it's maybe not 50-50, but maybe 70-30, 60-40 in favor of the studio.
And then when on the onset of this pandemic, when New York was kind of on everyone's radar and the shit really hit the fan there, was everything shut down, studio shut? I mean, imagine everything was just shut down for a while, right? And you weren't able to do anything, maybe just mixing and stuff at home. When were you able to kind of get back to work in the studio?
The studio closed around March 15th, maybe. I forget what day. And we were closed until June. We reopened July 1st. So basically 3.5 months of closure. I actually was in London when the pandemic hit because I was on these tours. I was just about to tell you, I was about to go to South Africa actually for a tour with a British band. And they stopped us. They canceled it literally a day or two before the flight. And so I stayed in London. And then since there was nothing happening in New York, I stayed there. And then I came back after the summer. And resumed working. Throughout the pandemic, I've of course kept working and kept doing mixes from home. That I've never stopped doing. And there was a time I was doing a few of them for free to help artists get through the pandemic.
That makes me think of you guys had a contest. Matt Bacon from Dropout Media. And
yeah,
you guys
of course.
I stayed with him when we was up in Brooklyn a few years ago. We played Lucky 13 or whatever it was called. So that you guys had like a competition, right, for some bands that you were mixing.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a competition. It was just about I wanted to do something for bands and help them get through the pandemic, and I wanted to I decided to provide mixing services for free for certain, but because when you offer something for free, everyone comes out of the woodwork. So I needed to have a way to make it, there would be a clear winner, quote unquote. It wasn't a competition. Nobody had to do something specific. It was just they would have to get their fans to vote for them, and whoever got more fans got a free mix. And I did 3 free mixes. Then I did another round of 3 free mixes.
Right.
So I mixed 6 bands for free. And, obviously that's not a sustainable model, but I was trying to do something positive for the industry, keep people, help people in need, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that was cool, man. How did you guys meet? And now that I think about it, I think he's over in London these days.
Matt, you mean?
Yeah.
Matt is actually back in Brooklyn right now. He spent 3 months in London, and his intention, I believe, was to move there full time, but the pandemic made it such that it just wasn't worth for him. He is back in Brooklyn now temporarily, and until he decides what to do. We're actually having lunch tomorrow. And yeah, I mean, Matt is still doing his thing as he baking bits on Instagram and now TikTok. You know, he's a media whore, collecting those likes.
Yeah.
No, he knows his shit. In fact, I enlisted him as a co-executive producer for my next doom metal album, which is a doom metal plus throat singing collaboration. I've put together all the best throat singers from Tuva, Mongolia, and Siberia, together with great doom metal players like Steve Von Till from Neurosis, Matt Pike from Sleep and High on Fire, Aaron Adey from Paradise Lost, so many great guitar players. And I produced this record, which I just signed to a label last month. They haven't announced it yet, so I'm gonna keep it zipped.
Oh, wow. Okay,
but it will be announced.
That sounds awesome.
Sometimes this year, and we'll know. I don't know. I have a release date yet. That the label will decide that.
So this is actually a band. Like, it basically have assembled a band and is going to release this.
I don't know if I'd call it a band. It's a production of mine. I played the drums, bass, and wrote the tunes. And then I hired guitar players and throat singers.
And then earlier you said you weren't a musician. What's up with that? And you just wrote this album. Once you've worked with John Zorn and Mike Patton and fucking Brian Wilson, I mean, yeah, how could anybody have? I wouldn't play my guitar around those people, sing around them or anything.
Exactly. Thank you. No, you got me there, but you also answered the way I would have.
Yeah, sure.
I just don't consider myself a musician that's worthy of calling himself a musician when I'm around all these fucking genius musicians. That said, I do know how to play a little bit of piano and a little bit of bass, and just enough to do some things. Like 2 years ago, I did a record with Jim Jarmusch, the film director, Lee Ronaldo, the guitar player of Sonic Youth, and a drummer called Balázs Pandi. The four of us made a quartet record, came out 2 years ago on Trost Records, an Austrian label, and we're putting out a new record of that quartet this year. But it's improvised music in which I play bass and keys.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Bass and keys, yes, I can play some, but I'm a producer. I'm a producer and an engineer. And that's,
one could argue, right now, as a producer, to be an efficient, good producer, you kind of need to know music. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
You need to be able to communicate the language, go, try this, and pick up an instrument and know what the fuck the notes are and be able to, right. I mean, it's always seemed really odd to me. And I think this happens where people are like, I want to be an audio engineer. And then they go to, it's some kind of schooling and they're like, all of a sudden they're learning music theory. Well, it's like, yeah, you have to fucking understand music if you're going to be doing this.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that it helps tremendously. I've had lessons back in Italy when I was a kid. I studied music theory, and it has helped me tremendously now as an engineer and as a producer, especially when I do these classical music sessions where I have to count bars and count bar numbers and go to certain bar or certain bar and beat and know where they are in the score and be able to follow along in the score. I wouldn't be able to play a score, but I can at least follow where they are. Right. And that's helped me tremendously. But I will also say that there are some incredible producers like Hal Wilner, who I've done that Mark Bolland record with, who didn't know any music at all. And yet he had he didn't know written music, he didn't know theory of music, but he had one of the most incredible wealths of knowledge about music in general. Like he listened to everything. He devoured record. He had probably 10 or 20,000 records between his two homes and his studio. And he just knew everything about music. And, he was an incredible person. I'm actually writing an article about him for Recording Magazine, the issue of April, in honor of his 1-year anniversary of his death. So if anyone wants to know more about Hal Wilner, they can pick up Recording Magazine April issue, April 2021. Or they can go to haltribute.com, which is a website that I've created in honor of Hal, cool, where you can learn about his incredible discography, all the records he's produced for Marion Faithfull, Metallica, Leonard Cohen, Jeff Buckley, Bill Frisell, etc., etc.
It actually just made me think of when you were talking about that. It kind of made me think of like DJs, right, or early guys, because that was their whole thing. They knew music and they listened to tons and tons and tons of records of all different styles, and they probably didn't know a lick of music theory and hadn't played an instrument in that in that sort of way, but really had great sensibilities, which kind of led to them in the early days really being, being hip hop producers, right, for the most part. And so I could see that correlation in that. I realize now I came off as a bit aggressive and snobby with that comment, but I feel like it's got to help a lot to be able to speak the language. Yeah.
It absolutely helps. 100%. It's, look, these are all tools. Mm-hmm. Knowing music theory is yet another tool in your arsenal of tools. The more tools you have, the more you can do. But, you can still do things with a different set of tools.
Marc, what would your advice be to someone who's starting out, wants to do audio engineering? What are some of the essential things they should focus on first?
They should not do it and become a lawyer.
What?
I said they should not do it and become a lawyer. No, they should understand that it's an uphill battle and that it's much harder today than it was many, many years ago. When I started, there were still studios in which you could do an internship. There were still records being made by humans. Nowadays, with the advent of AI and it's the uphill battle is even more uphill. The incline is getting higher and higher. So I would say don't get into it unless you are 2000% convinced that is your calling.
And then learn signal flow after that. Would that be?
Absolutely. That should be the first thing you learn. Don't assume, I get so many resumes from audio schools sent to me for people that want to intern here. And they all, at the top of the resume, they all put their Pro Tools certification, their Logic knowledge and skills. They don't get it. It's like, that is not what engineering is about. Knowing Pro Tools is not what makes you an engineer, but that is the assumption. It's like in photography, there used to be photographers and now there's camera owners. They're two different things. Camera owner is not a photographer. There's a whole plethora of knowledge that goes behind taking a shot, which has been flushed down the toilet with the advent of digital photography. And now everyone can call themselves a photographer.
Well, everyone's a model now. Everyone's a model on Instagram now, right?
Aside from that, that's just vanity. I'm talking people have iPhones and you can afford almost anyone can afford a DSLR. And so everyone is calling themselves a photographer, which is really just making the waters murky for the real photographers. So you have to swim through, shitloads of bad photos to find the coral reef that you can't see because there's so many turds floating.
Yeah, perfect way to put it in the line between the two. I feel like that's kind of seems that way for anything in the artistic medium these days, right? And unless you're maybe a live performer, maybe that's one thing that's still, you kind of have to deliver in that moment.
But absolutely. That live performance is always going to set apart the real musicians from the ones that are phoning it in.
Right. And not anyone, but you can have a huge one-hit wonder. You can make anybody sound like $1 million in the studio these days. But it seems like all the bands with longevity are great live bands. Well, and they write great songs consistently, and they perform great, So hopefully that stays.
It comes down to the songs, because the songs are the things that people are going to remember. There's a reason why, the great composers from the past have written timeless music that stays with us forever, and we can still relate to 10, 20, 30, 50 years later, or even earlier if you think about classical music. But nowadays, there isn't that reverence. People don't revere music making in the same way. Music has been devalued. Now I call it instant popcorn music, because it's all made in the same way. It's all made very quickly, and it has very little substance. It pops as popcorn does in your microwave, but it's microwaved.
Yeah.
People forgot about slow cooking. They forgot about ingredients. It's all flushed. It's all the same. There's exceptions, of course. There always are, and there always will be exceptions. But you have to, because of the democratization of access to Pro Tools and instruments and everything, which is a great thing in itself. I'm not against. I'm not trying to make it elitist. But because of that, there's so much crap that you have to search much harder to find the good stuff.
I imagine at your level, that's one thing nice. Like, you're not going to have, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess really people with no talent can be rich and come into a nice studio and pay a lot of money. Does that happen often, where you have someone come in there, it's just a horrific, like, tone deaf singer and wants to be the next Taylor Swift, and you're just like, okay, I'll just auto-tune the shit out of this? Or is that not something you have to deal with too often?
I mean, it does happen that they want to come in. Fortunately, I'm at a point in my career where I can pick and choose the things I want to work on. I employ the rule of the 3 M's: music, money, and mates. And the rule of the 3 M's, it says that you have to have at least 2 of those 3. So if it's a friend and he can't really sing, but whatever. I'm trying to say, if 2 out of those 3 are valid, are exist in the equation, you take the gig. Otherwise, I pass on the gig.
Right. Vic, you got anything to add? I'm sitting here just geeking out.
Well, I was going to say that maybe learning how to get some coffee would be a good skill set to develop too, for any internship, right? Learning how to be a gopher, doing the shit work. I think that develops a lot of character just right off the bat.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah.
Not expecting to just step right into it because you took a Pro Tools course, right?
Yeah. I mean, even today, just whatever industry you work in, you see, these young folks come in and they're just kind of hey, I want to do this stuff. And it's like, well, you haven't developed your chops yet, right? So you got to do some grunt work. You got to prove yourself.
Yeah, it's true. Nowadays, the barrier of entry is such that people don't think about these things anymore. But yeah, if you're going to get a studio internship, if you are that lucky to find a studio that's still alive and operational, definitely learn how to make good coffee, and you'll make a lot of people happy.
I feel like someone said something one time about Mike Patton, and like he's a big coffee drinker. And they're like, I found out what his favorite coffee is. I'm going to send it to him, or some shit like that. But yeah, you're right. Little things go a long way, right? And if you're going that extra mile for people without getting anything in return, and you know what I mean? Like in a studio environment, when you're at the bottom, like that's important. You can't just go in there with an expecting you're going to be the next great engineer just because you want to, or you think you do, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of Patton, one of the things I had read about you one time was the Christmas Zorn album, which I love. You guys did that record, and didn't he just come in and one take that vocal on the tune he sang on?
Oh, to be honest, I don't remember if it was one take, but Patton is an incredible singer, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was the first take. He's so amazing. He's one of my favorite singers of all time. We did do this here at EastSide Sound. I remember
the Zorn. Yeah.
I remember. All of Zorn's records that I've done were done here, but he did come in for that. He was in town, and we recorded it together. And yeah, it was fantastic, and it's a great record.
Who are some guys I imagine a lot, right? Some of these high end dudes that you've worked with that just come in and lay it down, and it's just brilliant. Like, what are some of your wow moments like that you've worked with that are just like, wow, this is the real deal? I'm seeing it happen.
Oh, there's a lot of them, man. Nick Cave, I had the honor and pleasure of working with him. He's such an incredible performer, so powerful.
Did you do something recent with Nick Cave? Was that kind of recent or no?
Yeah, like a couple years ago. Well,
okay.
I should say we recorded it 4 years ago, but it came out last year.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a song called Cosmic Dancer. You can look that up on YouTube. There's a video of it in which you can actually, the video starts with my hands on the console, and you can see me for a couple of split seconds here and there. And it's a video of the song Cosmic Dancer by Mark Bolland, which we recorded at Village Studio in Los Angeles. And working with him was such an incredible pleasure for me. But also, Kesha, who's like this, she's a pop star, but she has some incredible pipes. And when she sang that song, Children of the Revolution, I think that was one take. I mean, she just belted it out, and she was, no auto-tune, nothing. I don't like auto-tuning people. I like to work with people that you don't have to auto-tune if I can.
Well, I feel like that's like a lot of things, because nowadays, right, when I'm recording, especially I do a bunch of stuff at home, and I know it's not like, amazingly pro, but, and with the situation and budgets, it's like I do what I can. But I find myself sometimes, like, because you can look at a grid and get like super obsessed with your grid, and if you're like doing super pristine modern metal or Nashville pop country, right, I guess you want everything perfect on the grid. But a lot of other times, don't you want things to just, not out of time, not we're going to hear something out of time, but kind of let it breathe? Like, it depends on the project if you're going to chop something to death and grid it, I suppose. But I know I can get obsessed with like, I'm a little bit ahead on the 64th, and then I can look at my vocals and want to fuck with them in Melodyne. But it's like, do I really need to do that, or should I just do another take and try to like sing the damn thing better, right? Unless you just suck and you can't do it at all. So for the most part, I don't do that, but I have done it. And I think it's a rabbit hole that's easy to go down when you start messing with things sometimes,
My answer to that is, if you just suck at it and you can't do it without technology, you're probably in the wrong line of work.
Right. Well, but no one, like very few people, I mean, the greatest we're going to be right on. Most people are going to be a little, going to be a few cents here, and you're not going to be like perfect, right? But you're a human being singing.
But all those great records that we grew up with before autotune existed, do you care that they're a little bit off here and there? No, because it's a heartfelt performance, and people nowadays, they're after technical perfection and they forget emotion.
Right. I agree. When you do use that, is there a go-to program for Autotune or Melodyne or anything like that? Or
I mean, Autotune and Melodyne are both softwares that work very well to do what they do, which is pitching vocals. Like I said before, I don't like doing that. So if I have to, I will. But if I can help it, I won't. I'd rather get a couple of more takes and get it right. Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of practicing your craft to become better at it, rather than fake your way through it with technology.
Well, I know I'm guilty of this, and I think that's the problem, or the downside of the technology, because the technology in theory is great, right? But what you can do is just go like, okay, let me lay this down. It's not perfect, and I'll go fuck with it and make it good. Instead of going like, let me do it again, let me do it again, let me do it again, and then nailing a performance, right? Which once upon a time, that's what you had to do. And like you say, in track bands live, then it's a real performance. It's a real band playing in a room. It's not something that's been all
once upon a time, there were musicians who practiced their craft every single day, because they knew that when the time came for them to play in the studio, they had 1 or 2 or 3 takes, and they had to get it right. And if one of them messed up, all the other musicians in the band would have to redo it because of them.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, think about Sinatra records before multi-tracking, all those great records. People, they were fucking real musicians back then. Now, technology, sadly, has made musicians lazy. They work less hard at practicing their craft because they know that they have technology to fix everything that they mess up. And that's a terrible byproduct of technology, but what can we do? It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And technology, technology or the future is a train. And the train will arrive, and you can look at the train and decide to jump on, or you can look at the train go by and be left back in the station. So,
right.
I would like to tell you that I don't ever auto-tune, because I'd rather tell the musician to do it again. But it's a skill that one has to acquire so they can stay relevant and be able to do the work they need to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. A couple other things. You're a big fan of Children, right?
Where did you read that?
I've seen some of your posts. I need to just show, next time you rant, I got to show my fiance. She'll appreciate it, because I think a few podcasts back, I had a big rant about breeding. Victor's like, "Oh no, don't do it." I've been known to rant, but you're such a great guest, Marc. I just shut the fuck up and let you talk. So this has been great, man. So informative, and really appreciate you taking the time to do the podcast. Anything you want to add? I know marcurselli.com, like, people can find you there. Your discography is insane. I mean, and you've got it. Your website's pretty happening, man. It looks pretty up to date. And then you've got all these different projects you worked on in various capacities and everything. Do you do that, or do you have someone that does your website?
I appreciate you saying that, because I designed my website by myself.
Looks awesome. Yeah.
I did all of the work because I wanted to be in control of how I portray myself out there on the web. But yeah, marcurselli.com is my website. Stay tuned for an announcement of that doom metal throat singing collaboration record this year. Stay tuned for the new record with Jim Jarmusch, Lee Ronaldo, and Balazs Pandey. And other than that, if you follow me on social media at Marc Urselli on Instagram or Facebook, then you will see all the sessions that I do. And I'm also planning to start a little video series of gear that I use, sort of what we did with you on the podcast, but
awesome.
Every episode dedicated to a different piece of gear. So there will be good things to come if you follow me there and you are interested.
In the article you said, what was it about Hal? What was the engineer? What was it about?
Wilner, right?
The article is the website about Hal Wilner is haltribute.com, and the article about Hal is coming out on the April issue of Recording Magazine, which is a printed magazine you find in newspapers. But there's actually an article written by me about the making of that record every month. We started in January, but what we did basically, we decided to write we decided that I would write 12 articles about the making of the Angel-Headed Hipster record. And every issue has a different theme. So in January, I wrote an article about recording the drums for Angel-Headed Hipster. So I talked about which drummers were involved, how I mic'd their drum sets, which studios we used them, we did it in, etc., etc. Next issue, February was about vocals, etc., etc. March was about speakers and leakage and, the challenges of recording an album like that, which had string sections, horn sections, guitar players, percussionists, etc., etc. April, because it's the 1 year anniversary since Hal's death, untimely death, 1 year after his 64th birthday, will be dedicated to Hal. And then we will proceed. Every issue will have a different theme: guitars, percussions, bass, etc., etc., all the way until December 2021.
Awesome. That's cool. Very cool, man. Awesome, dude. Anything else to add? Advice for the kiddos?
I don't know.
That's good advice.
Said my piece.
Practice.
Nobody knows right now. Practice. Yeah.
Coffee.
Practice. Coffee. Practice. Don't be a slouch.
No, I would say whatever your craft is, whether you're an engineer, aspiring engineer, musician, photographer, learn your craft. Don't assume technology is going to save your ass, because it won't. Technology is like makeup. You know, you can put it on and you can hide the wrinkles, but eventually makeup's going to wear off and you're going to be left in the rain without makeup. So you got to, you know, work on your craft so that you don't have to rely on technology. No smoke and mirrors, real art. That's what I'm all about.
There it is right there. That was perfect, man. Perfect. Yeah, perfect ending. Yeah, that's why I'm a fan, dude. I remember reading about you, and like that's your perspective in as a musician and an engineer, and I really, really appreciate that. I feel very strongly from an artistic standpoint about that. So, dude, thanks for making the time, Marc. Really appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. This was great. A lot of fun. Take care.
Right. Take care. See you.
Bye.